So your audio is not that.
I think the frame is frozen.
So for us, actually, we are seeing, sir.
Okay, you can run the remaining this thing, Padma.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are doing that, sir. We are seeing the statistics with laparoscopic
Yeah,
adrenalectomy
just
2004 to 2013. Your publication of 1107 that we have seen. Next. Then the 1419 publication of 800 cases also we are seeing, sir.
yeah.
We knew you have so many number of cases, no, on the adrenal, and your experience is vast and unparalleled. Next. So retroperitoneal adrenalectomy 10 to 13. That slide is coming up to, and so you can see the comparison figures also, sir. Excellent track record. Next. Then retroperitoneal versus transperitoneal laparoscopic adrenalectomy meta-analysis also we are seeing. Next.
Yeah.
Now your voice is audible, sir. Are you able to see that, sir?
No, not moving the slide here. I think maybe my internet maybe.
Yeah, that's good, sir. We are having good vision. So next.
So you can go through the slides.
Yeah, sir. Lab technique, transperitoneal retroperitoneoscopy and robotic assisted adrenalectomy. Next. All those patient methods, all those papers are coming, sir. You can run to the slides. Next.
That's right. Transperitoneal is far more common, 7 times more common than retroperitoneoscopic.
Yeah, we are seeing the cross sections of this specimen also, larger specimens, larger specimens.
And myelolipomas and all those.
Yeah, sir. Yeah, sir. Next.
Yeah. Next.
Operating time, not the OR time, on average 90 minutes you have written. Next.
Yeah. That's right.
Post-op complications, sir, I would read out for you. Pulmonary edema in 2 cases, intra or post-operative bleeding 5, then DVT 1, pleural effusion 1, acute pancreatitis 1, and mortality 1. That also is very good record, sir. Next. Post-op outcomes requiring post-operative analgesia, no significant difference. Post-operative hospital stay, almost like average of 2 days. Next.
Yeah, that is between retro and transperitoneal.
Yes, sir. Yes. Next. Next. Bilateral retroperitoneoscopic adrenalectomy slides we are seeing. We also had a 12-year-old boy with paroxysmal hypertension, which we did a bilateral adrenalectomy. One side was cortical.
Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, conclusions. Laparoscopic adrenalectomy, standard of care in majority of patients with surgical adrenal disease. Significant reduction in wound-related morbidity. Patient benefit and safety is uppermost. Next. Yeah, next. Conclusion, retroperitoneoscopy, that is lateral approach complementary to transperitoneal laparoscopic for smaller glands, focused approach and endoscopic removal. That is the new gold standard of the current millennium. Next.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Padma, and thank the chairpersons. And
thank you, sir. Excellent presentation. We wanted to listen to you for adrenal because we knew you have the largest series of adrenal diseases. We have Dr. Sandeep Kumar, Chief Editor of Indian Journal of Surgery, Dr. Krishna Kumar Marar from Thrissur, Dr. Amar Rao Ongosurgeon from Enapoya, and Dr. Vijay Kumar, Vice Chancellor of Enapoya University in the chair. So maybe we will listen to their comments, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Padma. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Dr. Sandeep? Sir.
Yeah, I mean, excellent presentation. What can I say? This has been the most erudite presentation. Such a lovely series, and the slides and comparison, giving all the approaches to do adrenalectomy. And what I like most about this presentation is to start with a case scenario. I think most of our presentations should have a case scenario and the varied presentation of the disease, and then showing the basic operative techniques. So excellent presentation. Thank you. Congratulations to Professor Mishra. Masterly presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sandeep.
Dr. Vijay Kumar sir, do you want to make comments, sir? Vijay Kumar sir. Sir, thank you so much. Dr. Amar, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, yeah, sir, it was a very nice. Can you listen to me?
Yeah, please.
Yes, yes. Yeah, we can listen.
Sir, it was such a nice presentation by Professor Mishra. I think nobody can actually say anything with the amount of numbers sir is having. We have had only some of the medullary carcinomas of the thyroid along with pheochromocytomas, which of course are not very symptomatic or not, where we have done robotic adrenalectomy in our institute. But it was really heartfelt to see the number of cases he is doing, sir is doing, and it was a really good learning experience to be here for me.
Thank you.
Thank you, chairpersons. We are moving with the next topic, that is ETEP by Dr. Virendra Kumar Bansal. As all of you know, Dr. Virendra Kumar Bansal is the Professor of Surgery at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, well-known minimally invasive surgeon. Currently, he is the President of Society of Endoscopic Laparoscopic Surgeons of India. We are very happy to have Dr. Virendra Kumar Bansal to present ETEP. Dr. Bansal?
Thank you, Dr. Padma. Can you hear me?
Yeah, please.
Can you give me slide sharing?
Yeah, we are going to do that, sir.
Thank you so much, and I would really like to congratulate you. Since yesterday, I have been seeing your videos and presentations. The audio and the video quality was absolutely flawless. I would say, actually, you won't get this much video quality even in a live conference, actually. And the organization has been wonderful. And I think, as always, we just miss your hospitality in Kochi. That's the only thing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We missed all of your physical presence. We would have been very happy to have. That's what I was just telling. Yesterday only we got the refund from advance from the Holiday Inn because we couldn't conduct it. We have given them even advance, expecting all of you to be around, sir. Sir, you can have the screen sharing on. Happy to have you, sir.
I'm just starting.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Padma.
Yeah,
Once
sir,
again.
it's coming, sir. It's coming.
Yeah, and I would like to thank Dr. Sandeep Kumar and the other chairpersons for giving me this opportunity to present this topic. Yesterday, I think there was a live demonstration from Padma's hospital regarding this ETEP surgery. This is basically a new procedure which has been introduced in recent 3-4 years only, 2-3 years only, for the repair of ventral and incisional hernias. It is basically one of the other techniques for repair of incisional hernia, which is based on basically the retromuscular mesh hernioplasty, which was described by Reeve Stoppa. So it is just a method of doing retromuscular mesh hernioplasty, which can be done either by a ETEP RS repair or a ETEP RS, or plus a TAR can be combined with it. Or you can do it by the Milos technique, which has been popularized by Fortunelli and Bittner from Germany, or the E-Milos technique. The laparoscopic IPOM and laparoscopic IPOM are the other techniques, as we all know. For complex hernias, component separation, the interior or the posterior can also be a good alternative in the armamentarium for the repair of laparoscopic incisional and ventral hernias. Then you can combine various procedures. You can combine a open reduction of the contents and then a lap IPOM repair combined with it, or you can combine a interior or a posterior component separation and then do the procedure. So these are various hybrid procedures. So basically, what we need to understand is that in today's time, the incisional and ventral hernia repair is not simple. It is not only laparoscopic IPOM or a open repair. There are multiple options, and you have to tailor the technique according to the patient's requirement, patient's abdominal wall structure, and is it a requirement for that repair. ETEP is a retromuscular mesh placement, the Reeve Stoppa repair. The mesh is basically placed between the rectus muscle anteriorly and the posterior rectus sheath posteriorly. It can be combined with the transverse abdominis release, if the defect is very wide and you can't reconstruct the midline. Initially, the ETAP or the extended totally extraperitoneal repair was described for large, very difficult inguinal scrotal hernias, but then gradually the focus shifted more onto the incisional hernias. It is cost effective because you use a polypropylene mesh. You are not putting the mesh inside the abdominal cavity. But the learning curve is steep, as we know, all of us, the TEP repair also. You have to learn to enter that space and to make that space. Once you know how to make that space, then it is not difficult to learn ETAP procedure. The indications for ETAP at present are defect size of 4 to 12 centimeters. I would say more than 8 centimeters would definitely require some combination of a component separation. Most of the time, TART procedure, which is done. The contraindications to this ETAP technique per se include a previous retrorectus mesh placement, skin sinuses or fistulas, and very large complex hernias which require component separation and other hybrid procedures. The port position, as we do it, the patient is positioned with the supine arm stuck by the side and a little extension at the hip so that the abdominal wall opens up a little bit, and then you get some extra space to work in that area. And we always put in a Foley's catheter before we start any procedure in these kind of procedures. And generally, this is our port position which we prefer for a midline or upper midline or a umbilical defect. We would prefer to put a Hassan's port here in the pararectus area, just above the umbilicus on the left side, and then we create the space, and then we put it this 12 mm telescopic port here, and then two 5 mm working ports at the pararectus, in the pararectus area. These two ports are exactly where the inferior epigastric artery crosses the abdominal wall. So these ports have to be put very carefully. But if these ports are put nicely, then the dissection is much more easier. Sometimes an additional 5 mm port here may be required because if the defect is lower, then you can do the dissection from this. If you have a lower midline defect, then you can work from these two ports, and you can use this camera port only. And once you make the space, then you can come down to your normal ports which we use. Various people have described, various other surgeons have described various other ports. This technique was basically popularized by Belinsky et al. And their port position is something which I have shown in this diagram. For the upper defects, and for the lower defects, this is the port. They use 4 ports as shown in this figure. Then another port position for the upper defects, and then for the lower defects in the other diagram. This has been popularized in India. Sorry, go back. Then Sarfraz in India has popularized this technique to a large extent, and he prefers to use 4 ports in the upper. He basically creates both the sides separately. So 2 10 mm ports here, and then 2 5 mm ports on this side for these kind of defects. And for upper midline defects, he prefers to use 5 ports. This is the initial first port he uses, then this is the second port, and then he shifts down. And then he basically uses 5 ports for the upper defects. So different people use different defects, different ports. Basically, this shows that this procedure is still evolving. As we do it, this is the Hassan's port which has been put inside. This is the first view. You identify the ipsilateral, the left-sided inferior epigastric vessels, and then you insert a 5 mm working port, as I said. Then you create the space of Ritzius. So that as we do it in a TEP repair, that is the pubic symphysis, the pubic symphysis coming into view, the Cooper's ligament bilaterally, which will come, the bladder has gone down basically, and then you go on to the right side to identify the right inferior epigastric vessels. Once that has been done, then you can put another 5 mm working port, just taking care that you don't injure the inferior epigastric vessels. Once these 2 working ports are in position, Then at the midline in the suprapubic area, you put the another 10 mm working camera port, which would be your main camera port for the rest of the surgery. These ports have to be put very carefully, because if you enter the peritoneum during this time, then you will end up in trouble. You may not be able to proceed with this procedure actually further. Once this space is created, then you create the right rectorector space. The camera is in the suprapubic area, and then you have the two working ports. You identify the posterior rectus sheath, make this space, some flimsy vessels. Initially we used to use harmonic, but now we prefer to use basically the monopolar hook cautery for this dissection also. Generally it is a avascular plane, and hardly there is any bleeding. There are some smaller vessels which you need to take. This was a umbilical hernia actually. So both the sides rectus, the rectorector space has been made, and now we start dividing the midline to make the space further. Once this is done, then the defect is being both the posterior rectus sheaths are being divided, and the linea alba is kept in place, and now the defect is being the umbilicus, the momentum which was into the defect is being reduced from inside. The peritoneum has been opened, because you tend to leave the linea alba here, so that the midline is not disturbed. Only the midline is disturbed only in the area of the defect. Once this has been done, then you close the defect interiorly of the hernial defect is closed, and then the defect in the posterior rectus sheath is also closed. This is a nylon suture which we use. Once the defect is closed, and then you close the posterior rectus sheath also. This closure of the posterior rectus sheath is very important, because if you don't close it, the bowel may get entangled into this space and cause problems later on. So the closure of the posterior rectus sheath meticulously is also very important. Once these two things are done, then you have a very big space for the placement of a polypropylene mesh. Generally, this mesh size in Indian patients is around 15 to 25 centimeters, depending upon the body structure of the patient. This mesh is spread, and then you don't need to fix the mesh. You put in a drain, because there are some ooze from somewhere, some places. So it is better to put a drain in these patients for a day or two. And once this mesh is placed and spread, then the desufflation is done. The mesh is in place. We have planned a study at our institute, wherein we are doing our initial experience of comparing ETAP with IPOM, and we are including only midline primary ventral hernias and sagittal hernias, but the defect size we have taken only 2 to 5 centimeters, and we are not taking any strangulated or recurrent hernias which have been previously repaired with a mesh. These are some of the pre-op photographs of the patients, and we have done around 48 patients in our series so far, and the demographic profile was similar. The intraoperative data is almost similar. The ETAP is obviously taking more time, around 100 minutes as the mean time, and Prolene mesh has been used in all these patients, and the mesh size, as I said, is around 15 to 18 by 23 to 30 centimeters, and none of the patients in the ETAP group we have fixed the mesh, and defect closure was 100%, and the drain was placed in 100% of the patients. These are some of the photographs of these patients in the postoperative period. This is post-op, early post-op, in the first week post-op, and the postoperative mean length of hospital stay was 22.4 hours in the ETAP group, slightly longer because of the drain placement. The IPOM group was slightly lesser, and the mean pain score in the ETAP group was higher in our experience, and the mean cost obviously was higher in the IPOM group. and the mean pain score after 7 days was more in the IPOM group as compared to the ETAP group, and drain removal was generally second, third day, but sometimes it takes longer. And there was one patient who developed a seroma in the ETAP group, and we have a follow-up of around average of around 6 months, and none of the patients have had recurrence. These are some late follow-up patients photographs. So this is just a look at the literature till now. Belensky published a series in 2017 of 79 patients, wherein TAR was combined in 41 patients. We had 2 seromas, 1 wound dehiscence and 1 recurrence. Radu published a series of around 60 patients in 2019, wherein they reported no recurrence, but they also did TAR in 18 patients, along with the ETAP repair because of the defect size. And this is another series wherein they have compared non-randomized manner. They have compared 54 patients, and the results were almost similar. Sarfraz also reported his series of 21 patients and 3-month follow-up and 1 recurrence in this 3 months follow-up. So to conclude, I would say that ETAP is a repair which is still evolving. It has got a learning curve. Selected patients, the repair has to be, as I said in the beginning also, the repair has to be tailored to the patient's needs, and the cost is less in these patients because of the use of polypropylene mesh. And the major advantage of this procedure is that the mesh is being placed extraperitonally. We need to do further RCTs with the other comparative procedures like IPOM Plus or E-Mylos, wherein the defect is being closed. Those RCTs need to be done. And IPOM also, I would say, give good results up to 8 centimeters in size. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bansal, for an excellent presentation on ETAP. Yesterday, we actually had ETAP by Dr. Madhukar Pai from here, and we did IPOM Plus from Lakeshore, then IPOM Plus from Delhi. Dr. Tarun also did. So, delegates had a good opportunity to see different procedures, and there was a presentation by Dr. H.L. Rajput for the intraperitoneal version of this ETAP, placement of mesh retrorectally without going like an IPOM. So they had a variety of procedures, and so nice of you. Over to chairpersons for their comments. Dr. Sandeep, Dr. Amar, Dr. Amit, Dr. Srivastava.
I think Viren, it was very, very informative presentation, and things were very clear. Yesterday also Madhukar did a very good case, and I think it was just a reminder of the same technique and very well explained. I think the beginners must be really impressed by the technique, and they would probably take it up, because our main aim is that in cases where we can see the case and if we presume that yes, we can also do it. So that is the aim of the workshop, and I'm sure that many of us are going to take it up.
Thank you.
Nice presentation.
I've been seeing constantly since yesterday.
Very well covered, Viren. I think in a very short time you have covered a vast subject. And I think you brought out all the important points. Component separation, do you think that really is required in some of the patients, or is just because, hello?
Sir.
Dr. Sandeep can be on. Yeah, please, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please, sir.
Yeah, the component separation part is how frequently do you use it, and when really do you use it?
Sir, component separation in combination with ETAP is generally required if we are dealing with defect size more than 8 to 10 centimeters. The people, the series which I showed where they have done a component separation, the TAR procedure, is basically the hernial defects where the defect size was more than around 10 centimeters, because there it is difficult to bring the midline together. So in those patients, it is essential to be done with the ETAP actually. Otherwise, the closure of the defect would not be possible. Yeah,
I would just like to add that besides that we say hernia is 8 centimeters or 10 centimeters or 4 centimeters, I think it's the kind of the tension your hand feels when you try and bring the walls together anatomically. And if you think that there is enough tension, because sometimes, you know, the abdominal wall may be very flabby and even 10 to 12 or 15 centimeter defect can easily be closed. And at other times, even 4 centimeter defect may appear to the to your hand, perceiving hand. But if you're operating by a laparoscope, of course, you just have to go by the dimensions of the hernia and general tone. Have you any idea about using Botox in the lateral abdominal wall and achieving some relaxation there?
Sir, there are a lot of papers now coming out on the use of Botox in this ventral incisional hernia repairs. But personally, I have not. We don't have any experience of using Botox in our center. I have seen a lot of papers and a lot of good articles also. Good. I have interacted with people who use Botox,
Yeah.
but no personal experience.
Thank you, Professor Bansal. Wonderful
Thank you, sir.
presentation once again.
Thank you.
Dr. Sandeep,
Yes, sir.
the comments, the observations which you made are absolutely correct.
Okay, sir. Dr. Mishra.
चला गया सर का
Dr. Mishra is muted. Dr. Mishra, you are muted. Kindly unmute.
No, he is not muted, but little bit of low. Yeah, now it's muted, sir. Yeah, fine.
So I think your observation that many a times we are able to close, and we have done that, close the defect or reconstruct the linea alba with a good far near far technique in women particularly. In men actually with upper abdominal procedures it becomes difficult to bring the edges together. So there is a difference in the abdomen of men and women who have born and given birth to children. So their abdomen is, as you say, flabby, legs, muscles are they have expanded with the pregnancy, and one can do anatomical closure even without mesh. We have done some large hernias and results, particularly your Cardiff technique, Dr. Anurag, which he advocates far near far suture with loop nylon. So I think every case we have to individualize. As far as Botox is concerned, again, whenever there is a deficiency in the abdominal wall, and again in midline incisions and upper abdomen, when you cannot bring the edges together, then there might be a role of, I have used it in a couple of cases, but I don't know how much difference it would have made. But this is something which people use again for reconstruction of linea alba, so that even after having done posterior component separation, bilateral posterior component separation, and still linea alba closure or abdominal wall reconstruction is not possible. So these are complex hernias where I think the role of plastic surgery and flaps come in. So thank you so much, Dr. Sandeep.
Yep, thank you. One more thing, can I say if this time, the time permits?
Yeah, please, sir.
Padma, if,
Yes, sir.
yeah, okay. Recently, I received a mail from Dr. Disarda, and the way he is, I mean, I know Professor Mishra is not going to like what I'm going to say, but Dr. Disarda has been one person and one side of the pole who's been propagating mesh-free repair. And he came out with a whole thesis of totally mesh-free repair for all kinds of and all sizes of ventral hernia. I haven't gone through in detail with this, but one thing more I would like to add about ventral hernia, that what is said is that the most of the recurrences occur in the immediate post-operative period. In fact, a large number of recurrences occur when the patient is being extubated, and if the patient has been a jerky extubation, or within the first month, and then about more than 50% recurrences, if they occur within the first year. And then it is 1% recurrence per year. For the next 10 years, that is the kind of the statistics people bring out for ventral hernia. So Botox, really what it does is it gives you a fantastic opportunity because Botox, the effect of Botox is immediate, and it allows you to close it and the patient can rest. So I think there is a role of Botox for immediate relaxation, and it can obviate the need of component separation because there is enough local tissue. Very rarely ever there is a tissue loss in the ventral hernia repair. Even tissue loss is not there. It is just the misplaced tissue, weak tissue, a tissue which has got dilapidated or gone away. And one more thing is that if you are able to close it, primarily if you have a overlay mesh, now some evidence is coming that the recurrences have occurred more commonly in the sublay mesh as compared to the overlay mesh. I don't know what the dynamics has been. The dynamics of the hydrostatics that we were being taught was that the sublay meshes are like Stoppa's mesh or underlay mesh, provide a better buttress. But now there is a recent evidence that subcutaneous mesh, whatever dangers they have fought with the mesh rejection, probably provide much less in difficult, large, grotesque ventral hernias. I don't know what are your views.
That's a different debate altogether. I think.
Can I say
something?
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Thank you, chairpersons. We are just moving ahead with the next presentation.
Thank you.
Before that, Dr. Madhukar Pai wants to announce the results of the e-poster presentation.
Okay.
The winner of the e-poster is Ventral Hernia Hybrid Repair and Approach, Alish Mehta and Sandeep Dave.
Congratulations, Dr. Alish. We will go ahead with the next topic of the day. Thank you, chairpersons, for the previous sessions. We have new set of chairpersons for the next lecture, that is laparoscopy in last 25 years by Dr. Jugal B. Agarwal. Dr. S.D. Maurya, sir, is the founder president of CELSI, Dr. Maurya Sachkhand Hospital, Agra. Dr. Subodh Kumar from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Honorary Secretary of CELSI. Dr. Vinod Kumar, Treasurer, ASA Kerala Chapter. As all of you know, Dr. Agarwal is from Mumbai. He is a consultant surgeon at various hospitals, now in Seven Hills Hospital. He has been the president of CELSI. We are very happy to hear you about